everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review.
Today, we begin with a tragic story. Friends described him as humble and kind. A young rabbi, father of four, stabbed to death in broad daylight Wednesday afternoon. The motive? Police say the perpetrator suffered mental health issues and was not associated with any known militant group. But still, authorities say this was a nationalistic terror attack, and the Prime Minister is vowing a fierce response. Here's a closer look at yesterday's incident. A stabbing attack in a central Israeli city after months of calm. A Palestinian suspect arrested late Wednesday after the Petah Tikva incident that killed a 39-year-old Israeli rabbi, breaking the record silence. The victim stabbed several times until the attacker fled and was later detained by police. Just hours earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeting that for the first time in 56 years, 12 months have passed in Israel without a single death from a terror attack. Until just hours later, when father of four, Shai Ohayan, was stabbed to death.
התקבל דיווח על חשוד שדקר קורבן פה באזור צומת סגולה ונמלט מהמקום. החשוד החל בבריחה, הניידות הגיבו מהר לאירוע, ביצעו מעצר של החשוד כשעל גופו נתפס הסכין.
Police pegged the motive as nationalistic, adding that the suspect, Khalil Doikat, suffered mental health issues and was not connected to any Palestinian militant group. In response, Netanyahu sent his condolences to the family of the victim and promised severe punishment for the perpetrator. IDF units early Thursday raiding his home in a small village east of Nablus in the West Bank, confiscating documents, questioning relatives, and mapping the property for demolition. Meanwhile, hundreds came out to pay their respects. Ohayan was laid to rest Wednesday evening, hours after he was pronounced dead in hospital. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, just 40 were allowed to attend the private service. Family and friends remember him as humble and kind, calling the murder a horrible tragedy. Lauren Izo, ILTV. Israeli security forces continue to investigate the attack. Now, to understand more, Mickey Rosenfeld, the Israel police spokesperson, is joining us. Thank you, first of all, for joining us. I want to start with the investigation. Mickey, can you tell us what we know so far and if there's any new developments?
Well, what we've confirmed until now is that the suspect himself came in from the area of Nablus, made his way through in towards the area of Petah Tikva. And unfortunately, he did, in fact, carry out that stabbing attack horrifically at the scene, stabbing the 39-year-old man to death, who was, in fact, pronounced dead in hospital. Immediately, our units followed the incident, the man himself, the suspect himself, who was also tracked by a local man, a local resident who actually saw what took place and also notified our officers who arrived at the scene. And the suspect was arrested very quickly. He was also armed with the knife, and the investigation is continuing. Overnight, also, there were IDF and border police units that entered the village area, the Palestinian village area in Nablus, to carry out a search and try and gather more evidence and understand how the suspect arrived in the area of Petah Tikva. There was no specific intelligence that we had received in any way whatsoever about a terrorist attack in the area of Tel Aviv or Petah Tikva. And therefore, the ongoing investigation, intensive investigation, is continuing to try and understand and put the puzzle together why he carried out that terrorist attack and how he arrived at the scene.
Well, the suspect also tried to stab other civilians before a citizen took over. Do you think there's any way this could have been prevented? Do we need to have more police patrols on the streets to prevent these kinds of attacks?
Well, yesterday, throughout the day, both in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, there were regular police patrols that were taking place, as you can see. And we know from the time span, the response was very quick by our officers at the scene, both bomb disposal experts. And they worked very carefully without even opening fire at the suspect, as they didn't see the knife on him. He had hidden the knife on him. So the police officers responded in the correct way without shooting and killing him unless there was a life-threatening situation to those actual officers, even though he unfortunately had stabbed the Israeli 39-year-old just minutes before. So the response was fast, the response was rapid. And as of today, one day, almost 24 hours after the actual terrorist attack itself, things are regular, things are calm, but heightened security continues in populated areas, major cities such as Haifa, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv as well.
Mickey, is it possible that we might be seeing the start of a new wave of terror attacks?
Well, security assessments are taking place both by the Israeli National Police, Border Police, Shabak, ISA as well. We saw a stabbing attack that took place a couple of days ago in the area of Rosh Ha'ain, which is also relatively close to the Tel Aviv area. We believe and understand that that was a lone terrorist as well, but we're hoping that there won't be any increase. I mean, we can see that there is determination. There's always determination, unfortunately, by Palestinians to try and carry out terrorist attacks, but increased patrols on a regular basis.
Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you so much for this important update. Meanwhile, the new school year is swiftly approaching, which of course will include remote learning, masks, and social distancing. Still, no extra budget has been approved for the education system, and numbers are still on the rise. Nittany Manson with our COVID update.
The global pandemic currently ravaging the world is not slowing down ahead of the new Israeli school year. Israel reporting 1,936 new cases since Wednesday, and 2 more deaths, bringing the total loss of life to 877. A new bill that would ensure a special COVID-19 funding package for schools will not be implemented after the coalition failed to get enough votes to pass it, angering academic workers. The Finance Committee previously approving an extra 1.75 billion shekels for education. Israel's chief COVID-19 official, Professor Roni Gamzu, now has reaffirmed support from the Prime Minister after urging Ukraine to ban Israeli tourists for the high holidays in order to avoid a mass spread of the virus. Right-wing lawmakers had called him out for discriminating against the ultra-Orthodox, but Netanyahu on Wednesday dismissed any criticism backing Gamzu's position. Meanwhile, a Tel Aviv exhibit is remembering those who lost to COVID-19, but these gravestones aren't commemorating people. They're representing businesses. A sign at the entrance reads, Cemetery of Israel's Economy. The display, created by an organization called the Centers for Social Justice and approved by the municipality, is a comment on the government's handling of the health crisis. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
In other news, United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is still in the Middle East on tour in the wake of the Israel-UAE normalization deal.
Landing in Manama, Bahrain on Tuesday, United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo advocating for other regional powers to follow the United Arab Emirates' footsteps, getting closer with Israel. And this follows Pompeo's similar visit to Sudan and Jerusalem, where he recorded his speech for the Republican National Convention. But things in general seem to be going well now in this new Middle East, several Gulf states showing interest in normalizing with Israel, like the UAE. The first direct Israel-UAE commercial flight set to take off next week with official American and Israeli delegations.
הנחיתי את ראש המטה לביטחון לאומי, מאיר בן שבת, לצאת בראש משלחת ישראלית מקצועית לשיחות באיחוד האמירויות בשבוע הבא. המשלחת הזאת תפעל יחד עם צוות אמריקני שגם הוא יבוא לשם, יחד עם צוות מקביל של איחוד האמירויות, לקדם את השלום והנורמליזציה בין ישראל לאיחוד האמירויות.
The Palestinians, however, still rejecting the latest moves, criticizing Israel and the Arab states who may normalize for supposedly stabbing Ramallah in the back.
لن يتحقق من خلال القفز عن الفلسطينيين نحو تطبيع العلاقات مع دول عربية ولن يتم بصيغة وهم السلام مقابل السلام بل إنه يتم على أساس قرارات الشرعية الدولية ومبادرة السلام العربية ما يعني عقد اتفاق سلام مع الفلسطينيين.
Still, with no progress in nearly 30 years, Israel and several neighboring countries are moving forwards and away from the status quo stalemate. Even Morocco is walking back previous refusals, hinting that ties may be possible, but without further elaboration.
All right, now coronavirus aside, at least one other tragedy in Israel has been avoided. The Knesset overnight officially voted to delay the budget deadline. With a count of 66-36 in its third and final reading, Israel's leading lawmakers voted to delay the dissolving of the government for 120 days, thereby avoiding elections, which would have been the fourth in under 2 years. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz compromising at the last second before the Monday night state budget deadline to pass this delay.
אני אמשיך לעשות את הדבר הנכון, למנוע בחירות מיותרות שלא צריך, ואני מקווה שגם אחרים ינהגו ככה.
ואם חלילה נגיע לבחירות, עוד יישפך פה דם ברחובות. ולכן בשעה כזו אני לא אתן לאף אחד לאיים על אזרחי ישראל בבחירות.
Now, any new Israeli coalition has 100 days to pass a state budget by law. If a budget is not passed, the coalition dissolves and the election process begins. Israel's 100 days were up midnight on Monday, but not anymore. And in light of the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus, the past delay proposal also includes a 4% bump in the default 2020 budget, which is based on previous year's budgets plus a raise for inflation. Still, like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, the delay is not enough. Without a new and itemized budget agreement, new programs cannot begin, and government-run or affiliated schools and organizations don't know what funding to expect, if any. But most of all, elections are still on the table, as long as Netanyahu and Gantz can't agree on a fiscal plan. Netanyahu pushing for a one-year emergency budget, while Gantz promoting a two-year budget as stipulated in their unity coalition deal.
Moving on now, late last week, all over the country, phones were buzzing with the most shocking notification Israelis may have ever received. A young teenage girl alleges she was raped by 30 men in a hotel while on vacation in Eilat with friends. Since, thousands have taken to the streets to demand justice and change. Take a look. 30 men, one 16-year-old girl. It's the crime that's shocking the nation. Now, thousands are protesting the gang rape, which allegedly took place in an Eilat hotel room.
I'm here tonight to protest the awful rape of a 16-year-old girl in Eilat by 30 men and the entire rape culture that exists in this country and around the world. We are expecting the law authorities to take action and give the proper punishment and look for justice in the system.
In total, 9 suspects have been arrested.
From what we understand, she was sexually abused in the southern part of Israel, in the city of Eilat, in a hotel by a large number of men. At the moment, the Israeli National Police have arrested 10 suspects, a number of them being minors that we believed went into the hotel and abused her over a weekend.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu releasing a statement about the case as well, calling it a crime against humanity.
שלומה מטבע הדברים קשה מאוד, היא במצב נפשי לא פשוט. אנחנו מלווים אותה ותומכים בה בליווי רשויות הרווחה וכל הגורמים הרלוונטיים.
As protests raged over the incident, Israeli authorities on Sunday erased a mural that had been a long-time fixture at a Tel Aviv beach. Activists say it promotes sex crimes. The investigation continues, and authorities say the perpetrators will be brought to justice.
And an intensive investigation is continuing. No doubt there will be more suspects that will be arrested in one of the most severe cases that have taken place in Eilat.
Lauren Izo, ILTV.
Yet another weekend marred by disaster and fear in Israel's south. The ruling terrorist organization in Gaza, Hamas, continuing to send thousands of Israeli civilians running for shelter with their latest series of attacks, some of which have reportedly taken a disgusting turn. Dozens more explosive balloons burning thousands of acres. Another round of over a dozen rockets fired, setting off alarms and sending thousands of Israelis running. And now, sewage. Israeli authorities warning of an impending ecological disaster as a river of human waste spills over from Gaza into Israel. Israel calling the overflow a deliberate act. This after Hamas, which runs the Gaza Strip, recently threatened consequences for Israeli sanctions on the territory. The sanctions made in retaliation for Hamas's ongoing acts of terror. Far from backing down, though, the IDF is striking multiple Hamas targets, including military complexes, weapons manufacturing sites, and underground infrastructure. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz supposedly even warning of a return to targeted killings.
צה"ל ערוך, מגן וימשיך להגן על תושבי הדרום, יתקוף את התוקפים אותנו ויפגע בהם פגיעה קשה מאוד.
Hamas leaders reportedly going into hiding amidst the threat, while warning that if assassinations do resume, Tel Aviv will be targeted next. But maybe among the most impressive defense strategies, the IDF's new Lahav Or laser that's being fine-tuned to intercept incendiary balloon attacks. Meanwhile, aiming further up in the chain of command, Prime Minister Netanyahu calling out Hamas's backers in Tehran. The Iranian government fuels regional conflict through organizations like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Netanyahu then going on to thank the United States for upping sanctions against Iran as the UN lowers them.
The Security Council's failure to act was a dereliction of its duty to protect international peace and security. Unchallenged, this failure effectively makes the Security Council complicit in arming Iran's murderous regime. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have refused to accept this. Responsible countries should support the United States in seeking a real solution, one that will prevent Iran from building nuclear weapons.
Now, going back thousands of years, new evidence from the days of the biblical judges has been found. A Canaanite fortress discovered by the Israel Antiquities Authority and a group of teenage volunteers. Nittany Manson with the story.
ברוכים הבאים למצודת גלון. המבנה הזה הוא מבנה יוצא מן הכלל. יש לו 4 מגדלים ב4 פינות, הוא נבנה בקירות ובאבנים גדולות ומסיביות ביותר. שימו לב לסף הכניסה שאני עומד עליו, ומשקלו כ3 טון.
The Galon Fortress, built some 3,200 years ago in the 12th century BCE, features watchtowers, a courtyard paved with stone slabs, and rooms on either side. Hundreds of clay vessels and other artifacts have also been uncovered. But the fortress's existence alone is one of the biggest finds, proving that geopolitical tensions were just as high in ancient times as they still are today. Built by the Egyptian-governed Canaanites, the Galon Fortress likely served as a defense outpost against the expanding Philistine and Israelite armies. The Philistine kingdom of Gath to the southwest, and the Israelites in the Judean mountains in the northeast. As you may have predicted, though, the Canaanites didn't fare so well in the long run.
התוצאה הסופית היא שהפלישתים פולשים מזרחה, הישראלים מערבה, והכנענים בסופו של דבר נעלמים.
While returning to the ruins after thousands of years, the site is now being opened to the public completely free of charge. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
And it turns out that hidden treasures are a real thing. A group of teenagers volunteering in a local excavation stumbled upon something a little bit more of value than they had expected. Nittany Manson reports.
What if you stumbled upon an ancient hidden treasure? Teenagers in Israel struck gold this week, finding hundreds of coins that were stashed away in a clay vessel for more than a millennium.
חפרנו לאורך הריבוע ברצועות, ואז כשפיניתי את האדמה עם טוריה, אז ראיתי דברים שנראים כמו עלים, שבאתי לפנות אותם, ואז אמרתי שאולי זה בעצם מטבעות, אז התכופפתי להסתכל. בהתחלה מצאתי בערך 3, וכשהרמתי אותם ראיתי שהיו עוד מתחתיהם.
The group was volunteering with the Israel Antiquities Authority, excavating land where a new neighborhood is set to be built. The body responsible for ancient digs in the country say the person who left it behind must have been planning to get it back, but his identity remains a mystery.
The unique thing about this gold hoard is actually that it shows us a lot about international commerce of that time period in the area, which was on the rise and prospering, as opposed to the commerce in Europe at the time, where the use of gold actually started dwindling.
Experts say that the amount of money found back at that time would have been enough to buy a luxury home in one of the fanciest neighborhoods. Needless to say, today the treasure is priceless. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
All right, now this next story may make the male half of our audience a little uncomfortable. Sorry about that. It takes us to New Zealand, where new Jewish parents Noam and Elisheva Fogel were faced with a huge problem. How could they perform a circumcision on their new baby boy and without the help of experts? In the Jewish tradition, it's customary to circumcise baby boys at 8 days old as a symbol of the covenant between Jews and God. But in New Zealand, the mohel, or circumcision professional, must also be a certified doctor, and there are none who fit the bill in New Zealand's small Jewish community. So the mohel is usually flown in from Australia to perform the ritual. And here lies the issue. Due to coronavirus lockdowns, no mohel has been able to arrive, leaving the Fogels with a 5-month-old uncircumcised baby and a choice: to continue to wait for lockdowns to be lifted or do the ritual themselves. So, you guessed it, with supervision and help from a local doctor and the community's rabbi, Noam Fogel did the deed himself, of course with all the sanitary precautions. The proud father adding that this is definitely a happy and emotional moment and that they're waiting for the day when they can tell their son what he went through. Israelis taking to the coastline to enjoy some fun in the sun while leaving the waters better than when they arrived. Aaron Porras with the details.
This is 29-year-old Saeed Darawshi, a resident from the northern Israeli town of Iksal, who was paralyzed from the waist down at a young age.
في جيل 10 سنين اكتشفوا عندي مرض في العضلات لحد جيل 19 قبل بين ال 19 وال 20 لحد هذا الجيل مشيت عادي تفكدت عادي مشيت عادي سويت كل شيء عادي في جيل بين ال 19 وال 20 صار عندي فيروس في النخاع الشوكي ومع المرض الأساسي صار عندي شلل في إجري الثنتين.
But taking to the sea where his immobility isn't a problem, Darawshi has since become an avid and very active scuba diver.
ليش اخترت غوص؟ كثير بحب البحر وكثير بتريح لما بكون في البحر. اخترت الغوص كنت مرة في رحلة خارج البلاد ومشان نعمل فعالية من الفعاليات اللي بيعملوها الناس لما بيطلعوا بيشموا الهواء. نزلنا جربت الغوص وكثير كثير حبيته مشان فيه اشي اللي اول اشي انت في سكوت تام وبعدين في اتصال في اشي بيصير بين جسمك وبين الاشي اللي انت بتحس فيه لنفسك لما انت بتسمعه كل نفس بتطلعه بتفوته انت حاس فيه.
So in a sense, giving back more than he receives, Darawshi has now also made it his mission to keep his beloved coastlines clean. And far from standing in the way, it seems that if anything, his disease and the wheelchair it put him in reinforce him.
يعني احنا جايين نمسط ونتفرج على شغلات حلوة. ليش لما اشوف سمكة عالقة بحبل صيد بخيط صيد اللي علقان بين صخرتين تحت المي. فمن هناك قررت انه كل مرة انا بنزل بغطس انا واللي معاي بناخذ معنا كيس اللي بنشوف شو بنشوفه بطريقنا بنحطه في الكيس وبنطلعه معنا بناخذه معنا لبرا. اذا بتحب البحر من فوق فاكيد راح تحبه من تحت اكثر واكثر.
Aaron Porras, ILTV. And that's it for ILTV's weekly review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.